Welcome to Fight News Now. I'm John Pollock, along with John Ramdeen and Robin Black. On today's discussion, we are going to be delving into UFC 200, which is only 2 weeks away. Earlier this week, former welterweight champion Johnny Hendricks was here in studio, and we discussed with him the possible return of George St-Pierre. And here's Johnny Hendricks reflecting on their fight from 3 years ago. He just announced he's looking to make his return. A man you're no stranger to, especially in this country, is George St-Pierre. Is that a rematch that you would like to have one day? Is that one that still kind of eats at you because of just the close nature of that fight in 2013?
Close?
Well, it was. I think it came down to that first round.
I'm just joking with you. Really? I thought it was 4-1. Even whenever I look back, I still give it 4-1. And I'll be lucky, and I'll even be generous. I'll give him 4-3 or 3-2.
3-2.
3-2. That's just being generous because he did what he did, and he was who he is. But yeah, I would be interested in, and we'll even go 185.
Oh, well, that looks to be the weight class he's coming back
yeah,
at.
Hey, that's perfectly fine with me. Hey, that means I get to be stronger, eat more. I love it. But right now, my mind's not even on him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I said, I so many times in my career where I'm so focused on this, and then all of a sudden I get dragged to something like this. I tell GSP, like I said, from all my interviews, I have so much respect for him, for what he did. Let's leave it at that.
All right, that was former welterweight champion Johnny Hendricks. The idea of Hendricks and George St-Pierre fighting at 185 pounds, John Ramdeen classifies that as ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I mean, George St-Pierre is not even back in the UFC. He hasn't signed. You'd see everything, the UFC, a full push with this fight with Michael Bisping. We don't know if that's the case. Some of my sources are saying that Bisping, the emotional guy that he is because of the stuff that Henderson's been saying and the stuff that Luke Rockhold's been saying, it's like, okay, forget it. I want to fight those guys. I'm all ticked off. So there are so many factors involved before the George St-Pierre Michael Bisping fight happens. This is certainly way in the future for George St-Pierre to have a rematch with Johnny Hendricks.
Hey, you just said Bisping's busy. I mean, it makes sense to me. I really did enjoy it. And Hendricks is very likable. He just comes off like a likable guy, and you forget that this was a former champion, a dominant wrestler, a guy who touches your chin with his left hand, and you're dead. Yeah. You're dead. And I like the way he was with Pollock. John's like, it was a close fight. Well, maybe it was 3 rounds to 2. Well, I think that's kind of what Pollock was saying.
He's saying, no. Yeah. In my mind, it was 4-1. Yeah. But because he's
if I'm
the
generous, it could have been 3-2. Yeah. And if it was 3-2 and it did come down to the first, well, then I guess it was actually a really close fight. But to be fair, the first round was the deciding round. I think everybody split the round 2, 3, 4, 5.
George won the first round.
Well, there are many who think that George did not. Big John McCarthy, who teaches the judging course.
Didn't he also teach Jaron?
Oh, man, Jaron's our friend. He did do a terrible job the other day. But yeah, I mean, there are many who think that Hendricks won that. The record books will say that George St-Pierre won it and then decided to step away. And can you blame him? You make that much money, you have that great a career. The idea of stepping back now is very interesting. We talked about CM Punk taking his first fight yesterday. He doesn't know what he's in store for. So there's a certain amount of, let's go and have the experience. George knows exactly what that is. And he fights the toughest guys in the world. He knows exactly how traumatizing it is, how terrifying it is, how you get post-traumatic stress disorder, whether you know it or not, the damage that you take. He knows all of that. If he's choosing to come back and fight, despite all of that and despite the fact he doesn't need another penny for as long as he lives, it's because that man loves the competition.
It's true, but at the same time, John and I were talking about it. One of the reasons why Bisping is such an attractive opponent for George St-Pierre is one of the reasons why he left the sport. He said the sport is dirty. Until the sport gets cleaned up, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. Michael Bisping, I think a lot of people consider him to be one of the cleanest fighters in the world, including George St-Pierre's coach, Firas Zahabi. So you look at all the positives. Okay, who are some of the biggest?
Bisping likes to drink beer, though.
Sure.
That'll mess you up.
Sure. But you look at who's going to sell the fight? Well, there's maybe 3 or 4 fighters that can, in the UFC's organization, that could sell a fight better than Michael Bisping. Yeah. On top of that, you don't have a prime Michael Bisping. We know he has damage in his eye. The 185-pound championship is on the line. You're going to make more money in this fight than probably any other fight. So you can see there's many reasons for George St-Pierre to be attracted to this particular fight.
And the fact that there's so many middleweights, and you include George St-Pierre if you were to go up there, how many of these guys would you list that would be favorites over the current champion?
Jacare, I mean, that George St-Pierre would be favorites over?
Sorry, that would be favored against Michael Bisping.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what you look at.
Listen, Michael's a friend of mine. Bisping, can you meet me over here at camera 3? Seriously. Mike, listen, this is the money fight. Yeah. This is the guy you have to fight. George St-Pierre, if anybody said other than you and your mom, even your son, he picks against you, that you were going to beat Anderson Silva and then defeat Luke Rockhold for the middleweight title and then fight George St-Pierre with the chance to beat him, you might be discussed as one of the greatest of all time. You'll make crazy amounts of money. Also, George is this tall, Mike. This is the guy you need to fight. Who cares what Dan says? Who cares what Luke Rockhold says? Don't listen to that. Listen to Cha-Ching, my brother.
This guy is, I mean, you throw in whatever this fight is, everyone expects Michael Bisping to fight one more time this year. You defeat another guy at that level, this guy will be fighter of the year. Yeah, this will be one of the most impressive years in recent memory.
I think Michael Bisping has to be considered the fighter of the year just because
of the first 6 months here we're at the midpoint.
Sure. I mean, you get that huge victory over Anderson Silva and dealing with adversity during that fight as Silva lands the knee. So there was all of that confusion. There was all taking the fight on short notice against one of the most dominant athletes in mixed martial arts, getting a stoppage victory to become the champion.
And it's the level of underdog he was too. Yeah. And I remember distinctly when this fight was made with Anderson Silva and you were stating in our office the fact you believed Michael Bisping could win this fight, there was laughter throughout this office.
I was the guy picking Bisping, but we I was mostly just because I picked against Anderson always to entertain everybody.
Yeah.
Let's end on Johnny Hendricks here and get back to his focus because he is fighting Kelvin Gastelum, and I think that speaks to the depth of this card. This guy won't even be on the pay-per-view portion of UFC 200. I think this is a really important fight for Johnny Hendricks. He's coming off that very difficult loss to Stephen Thompson, and Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum is a very dangerous welterweight, and I don't think we've even seen the best of him yet. You need to be beating the Kelvin Gastelums if you're Johnny Hendricks and staying in what is perhaps the deepest division in the UFC. And to his point there, I know I'm trying to get him to talk about George St-Pierre. His focus is Kelvin Gastelum in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you know, I was talking to him as well, and he's a competitor. Like everything he does in his life, he wants to succeed at. He wants to be the best. He said, as a matter of fact, he can't go and play sports with his friends because he is looking to win. He kind of wrecks everybody's good time because it's always about competition. And I think that's what you need to get back to the top of that mountain. So he sees Kelvin Gastelum as just another challenge to get to the top of the heap where he can recapture his 170-pound championship.
You know, he had the experience of fighting Stephen Thompson, who blew out Ellenberger and then blew out Johnny and then stopped Rory, and Rory came as prepared as anybody could, maybe this side of Carlos Condit. So he had that experience of a guy changing the game, rewriting the rules of how you have to fight on the way up. What if Kelvin Gastelum is one of those guys? You never know after you've had that experience if the next guy is that guy. All you can worry about is yourself. And as much as Johnny was like, you know, hey man, I get sidetracked, he still did start thinking about it. He was talking about weight and well, I could eat and all this kind of stuff. You got to stay focused on Kelvin Gastelum because he's got his own trajectory. There's 2 guys in the cage, and that guy's coming in there with plans of his own.
International Fight Week kicks off Thursday night, July the 7th, and you can catch that first of 3 consecutive nights of fights here on Fight Network in Canada, headlined by Rafael Dos Anjos defending the UFC lightweight gold against Eddie Alvarez.